Hey everyone. I have Slipdisc here with me. It's in case you're wondering why we have the Apple logo in the middle here. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. We were supposed to have a third person, but they're kind of busy with other things right now. I'm not gonna go too much in. So we're going to try and not turn this into the Apple Bash Power Hour. No guarantee on that. It's like you have a Windows person and a Linux person talking about Apple. It's what could go wrong with that, right? You at least have an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, so he's an Apple fan, kinda. You know, I have mixed feelings about this first point. Okay. The iPad is finally, now a few months in, but they're addressing some of its issues. What is it? They added bookmarks and gave it the ability to read, standard PDFs. What I didn't get is why it didn't have PDFs to start with.
Those were always available through the App Store, third-party applications to allow you to read PDF files.
So this is basically just a file that Apple. This is something it could already do via the Apps Store. It's just Apple's now claiming credit for it. It's a big announcement, basic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another way to cut the developers off to just say to them that your app basically duplicates a functionality that's already built into the iPhone or iPad. So.
I know a lot of people are going to say this is just because you hate Apple, but that is my honest believement on what Apple's ultimate plan with the App Store is. That they're going to basically reinvent that's the popular app, because back when the iPhone came out in 2007, Steve Jobs sat up there in front of people and said, we don't need a third-party app store. We don't need it. And, of course, there were several things that the iPhone didn't do that people wanted to do, like ringtones and games. But I think they'll get rid of it. What I found funny on that, though, it's apparently this hasn't stopped the Apple fan crack addicts from wanting the iPad. Did you hear about this thing that two kids got busted on Craigslist for trying to trade drugs for an iPad?
Yeah. That's a Darwin Award right there.
Yeah. It's like, today on As the Apple Turns. Everybody knows the cops are watching Craigslist as of late, especially with the Craigslist killer and everything else. It's like, they had to be under the influence of something when they decided to do that. I don't know. It's before we start getting into the iPhone stuff and other stuff. What did you think about those reasons why Apple was? Because Apple actually, I was surprised that Steve Jobs got up there and outlined semi-clear criteria of why they were rejecting apps. You know what I'm talking about there? Like, they listed the 3 primary reasons they don't take them, 2 of which I think are complete bullshit.
Right.
What was those 3 reasons? Like, doesn't function or do what the developer says it does. That was the only one I thought had any validity whatsoever there. It's the use of private APIs. It's like, that's the... For those of you who don't get, I've talked about this in the past, the Android versus iPhone debate. It's like, if you have to root your Android phone, how is that any different than jailbreaking your iPhone? The difference is, with few exceptions, Android devices have a little toggle switch for you to go, okay, I understand the risks that come with letting somebody else put in other APIs to add functionality, but I want that app. It's like, I mean, does that really get in the way? There's other reasons besides just that I'm not a big iPhone or iOS as it is now platform person, but is that...
Yeah, I would think at this point that any developer that's worth his salt you would have to be a fool to develop an app and submit it to the App Store knowing full well that it uses some sort of third-party API, because Apple basically, they go over the entire program. They're going to catch it.
Well, no, they're going to catch it and they're going to flag it. My thing is, at this point, is it really necessary? Because a lot of times I've looked at the apps that are doing that, and it's less an issue in OS 4. Because Apple finally they've allowed multitasking to a point. I mean, it's not true multitasking, but it's good enough for a lot of things.
Right.
And they've allowed, it's like, okay, you can run this task and this task and this task in parallel, but the rest of your app has to shut down, which is actually the way the better apps work on Android. They don't all work that way, but the better ones that aren't resource hags do. They're like, we're not running anything we don't have to be, which is a good thing. But most of when people were submitting extra APIs, it's not because that API isn't in the iOS platform. It's because Apple didn't enable the hook they need to tie into it and use it themselves. And it's like they're not trying to make the device do anything it can't do and anything that Apple didn't design it to do. They're trying to make it do something that Apple designed it so only Apple can do it. That's the part I have a problem with there. I'm like, if you don't... I get the security concern. No APIs, we want absolute control of this file. I get that. Then you should have each and every one of those hooks enableable. You get where I'm going on there? It's...
Right. Well, I mean, if they're available to the programmer.
But a lot of them are only available to Apple is the thing. It's like the big announcement back when they released the iPads, so they didn't re-emphasize it here, was we've now opened up 1,500 APIs. They weren't new, they just enabled the ability to access them.
Okay.
And that's the bit that bugs me. It's like the gyroscope thing they added in. They could have made that so only Apple apps could use that. I mean, they didn't. But if Apple had chose to do that, it's like the front-facing camera is open. So anyone can access it, but it wouldn't have had to been. And then the only way you could access the front-facing camera if Apple hadn't opened that API would have been to write your own to access it.
I think that'll be interesting with the front-facing camera, how that plays out if they actually allow this thing to function over 3G, or if they're going to allow the camera to function with another webcam or another type of camera, something other than two 4-gen iPhones.
Yeah, I'm not really sure on that.
I just feel like if they don't, it's not really open. You could call it open, but then when you say it's open, but you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, and you can only do it this way, that's not really open.
No, that's a real interesting topic there in general. It's like Apple says they're open, but then they come in and go, well, we're open as long as you're working between Apple device A and Apple device B. I mean, it's like we finally have tethering on AT&T with the iPhones, which nobody talked about, but it's only via USB. It's like no Wi-Fi tethering, no... I could honestly see if they'd enable that, iOS users, like, they'd have data either on their iPad or their iPhone, but not both, which is probably why it isn't enabled that way. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. We got to pause for a second.